Well, we had the chance to catch up with Debbie Hutchison on the campaign trail here with her cute wagon. Debbie, could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to run for school board?
Well, hello everyone. First of all, it's been great going through the community, house to house, talking to our neighborhood, and just asking them if they have any questions for me and getting to know a little bit about our neighborhood. My husband and I moved here about 5 years ago, so this was a great opportunity to get to know our community.
Absolutely. And so when people ask, what went into your decision to run for school board? What do you share with them?
For me, it's parental rights. Parents need to have that input into what happens in the schools. What the school board did with the policy and passing it when you had parents up there just pleading their hearts out, saying, please don't pass this. Please just listen to us. Can you compromise? That's something that I do very well, is compromise.
Why are you running?
I am running because Greg Talberg's poor leadership decisions has divided a beautiful community, a place where I grew up, where I raised my children, and we need to restore and heal this community immediately.
I've answered this question several times in the community from friends and family and people I know here that why are you running? What's your interest in even being on the school board now that your children are gone and out of the school system? So I'm running because the school board, they are elected officials from our community to represent our values and what we deem we want to have in our school system. So last October, when they tried to pass policy 8011, there was a big upheaval in our community. A lot of divide was created. The communication from the public, from the written communications, were in a vast majority against this policy. Through several different board meetings, there was zero transparency for how they kept continuing to evolve this policy. There was no feedback given to the people that wrote or the few people that talked at the board meetings, and then they continued to pass this policy anyway. So it was not in our community's interest. It was very apparent and readily apparent. They went ahead and did this, and so I'm running because I believe we need to restore our community trust and some transparency back to our school board.
There's a number of things, but I'll start with this. And I've learned that the school was nearly bankrupt not too long ago. So I made the poor decision to let the money run dry, and it was moments away from collapsing for a couple of years. Just got lucky. We can't sit around just wait for it to be lucky. My kids are going through that school now. They're just starting to go through. So that's why I'm here. I want to make sure we start a zero balance budget and we work it all the way up, because it has to be done. Mm-hmm. It's hard work. It's not going to be easy. I know it's not going to be easy, but it has to be done.
We all know that Williamston Schools has a large amount of debt on the books, and other than a more passive approach, we've heard a lot about increasing enrollment, which ultimately a board member doesn't control. What kind of practical experience do you bring that would accelerate the climb out of debt?
Sure, great question. So my business background actually has allowed me the opportunity to manage very large budgets, and also I've worked with branches that have been struggling. I'd walk in and assess the situation. I would actually turn that branch around and get them back on track. So I have actual proven real-world experience of taking a situation and making it better by using good fiscal responsibility and making good decisions.
Tell us more about the branch that you were able, what kind of things did you say? What kind of recommendations did you end up making to them?
Yeah, good question. So I actually was sent to one of my branches that's in Livingston County, which is in a very economically affluent area, and did an assessment. I analyzed the staffing needs of that particular branch, the economic conditions, did a risk assessment to find out if there was potential for that particular branch, and then after doing a complete assessment of that, determined that there was a business potential there. We realigned our staffing. We were able to bring new people to the table, the right leadership in place, and we were able to turn that ship around. The biggest thing with the turnaround is having the right people in the right place. I found that there were staff that were ill-equipped to do the task at hand, and sometimes you do have to shake things up a little bit to make that happen.
So at the end of the day, what's the most important thing about a school board position?
Sure. Making policies and passing budgets. We need to maintain a solid budget for this district, get it back on track. We need to remove the junk bond status immediately, and then we need to create policies as needed that support academic success for our kids.
A school to me is like another business. So you have a budget. You don't spend outside of your budget. You spend what money comes in, and you look at contracts and different things to see if there's ways that we can save money. People may have contracts that have been there for years, but just by looking at the contracts today might save us money in the long run.
So, I mean, I come from a long line of entrepreneurs and small business, so I kind of tend to understand debits and credits and, you know, on the small business side. So I understand what you need to make a profit. You know, that's a plain fact. And this is a competitive school. We compete with other schools around us, whether officially or not. And we need to bring not only bring the results, we also need to make sure we're doing it efficiently.
So it sounds like finances might be a foundation for other things like increasing teacher salaries and staying competitive with other areas. What's your view on that?
Absolutely, good teachers should get good pay. That's a fact. And then if we have the good teachers, we have to keep them.
So Craig, what are the most important issues you see facing Williamston schools?
Currently right now, it's our budget situation. So we have junk bond status right now for our current bonds that are outstanding. The presentations the superintendent and the school have done really seem to rely mostly on just increasing our student population to close this budget deficit. This is followed by a safety. We need to make sure our schools are safe for all our children. Then third, really comes back to our community. There's not a lot of trust in our school right now. It's divided our community. After 20 years in this community, I've never seen such division, such hate and rhetoric floating around in different areas, and we have to get back to where we are. We are a small town. Everybody is usually a friendly neighborhood. It's a great place to be. We have great school systems. We need to heal this divide that we have. And that's one of the big things.
It's interesting. That was the last question asked at the PTSA forum about how do you plan to heal the community. And President Talberg suggested that there's always been a divide. This just bubbled it up to the surface. What do you say to that?
I disagree 100% with Mr. Talberg on that front. So the divide was created by the board. So they had tons of communication from all sides. Or all people in this town. They had 80%, as I stated earlier, of communication against this policy. They never held a community forum. They knew the public was against this. They went ahead, they created this divide. So this divide was not here. It's never been here.
So I say I've never seen a divide in this community. I think this is a very community that comes together. They do parades at Christmas, in the summertime, Memorial Day. There's a lot of things that this community does together. How to heal them, how to heal the community, I'm sure it's going to take some time, but I think that we need to get the parents more involved, talk to them. How do we bring them to the table? Is there some ideas that they would rather us do than rather having school board meetings when they're trying to have their dinners with their children? Or I think it's a compromise. We need to figure out that compromise that works well for all.
I'm a big proponent of the civil society, and it lives pretty strong in this community. I don't think it was ever underlying at all. They really had to pull a partisan issue to polarize this community. That's a real shame. They didn't have to do that way. By bringing in the community through forums and so forth, we could have done a much better job on this. This forced people to sit on certain sides specifically. But honestly, this is a nonpartisan issue. When you look at it objectively, this is a nonpartisan issue, and that's why people look at it and say this is all about parental rights. You know, the other side doesn't really have an argument for that, so they have to. It's emotional for them, and it's purely emotional. It's a real shame because we want to solve the problem.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, kids, all kids. What is your statement on kids, all kids, protecting them, treating them well?
Everyone should respect the individual rights of each other. That's a fact, and that's what we should be communicating. What I do find a shame of all this partisan bickering, kids see this. They see the divide. And that's a real shame that they decided to do this.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing that we have to do is bring people together. So everybody needs to have their voice heard. The thing that caused this divide in our community, which did not exist, I grew up in this community. Both of my children graduated from this district. It was Greg's poor leadership choices and bringing a policy that was not needed, nor was it desired by the community. So the first thing we need to do is bring everyone to the table and have a sincere conversation about all of the fears and all of the desires of every single member of this community. And once we've had all that information, then let's assess the situation and see what's going to make most sense going forward for the community.
So, Walter, let's just address the elephant in the room. As you've been going around campaigning, what have you heard about Policy 8011 gender identity as far as some of the problems with it?
Well, the biggest thing we hear about are parental rights, and also how it came about, how it was processed, put through the process to be voted on ultimately, and I guess also privacy rights, for the students themselves. It didn't cover a good population, and basically most of the population of the students, and they didn't consider it. That, I think, is our biggest concern. And then, the parental rights is what it initially took for me. That's when the policy, was first thrusted upon the community. And as the process went along, it was about how it went about. And in the end, the result was, well, it still didn't cover the privacy of a good 99.99% of the students.
So tell me more of this, how it was brought about is a problem for people.
Well, the biggest problem was there was no outreach to the community to discuss what was needed for the students, or how it would comply with what the community wanted. It seemed to really be an outside push from outside the community. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't homegrown. It was pushed by special interests.
It's my understanding that there wasn't even any community involvement, that the board was ready to pass a 6-page version of this if a parent wouldn't have blown the whistle.
Correct. There was a board meeting going on. They mentioned this and brought this up, that they were going to vote on it at the next board meeting. There were only 4 or 5 people that were in attendance at that board meeting, and they brought that back to the community. The next board meeting, there were several hundred people sitting around wanting to talk about this issue. So they were going to go ahead, move this policy through, not talk to anybody in the public, and just slide it on in one of their meetings and not get any community feedback at all whatsoever with this policy.
One of the things that bothered me a lot was the fact that we didn't even know this was going on in our community. This was something that was trying to be pushed under the rug, just like they tried to do in health school systems. And I believe Greg Talberg's a part of that as well. And he knew that was happening there, and it didn't get passed there, so now he's here trying to get it passed in our community, in our small little community.
So when I'm out in the community, and I've been talking to individuals here in Williamston, the biggest issue that seems to come up with Policy 8011 revolves around the parental notification. So currently there's language that says and/or. So the big key piece in there is that we have the or. So the school officials do not have to notify the parents. So if somebody is 18 or emancipated and has that legal documentation done, then they are free and clear. They can do what they want. They are legally an adult and covered under our legal system. So anybody who is under the age of 18, the parental notification and the school keeping that from the parents is a major sticking point for a lot of people in our community.
Now, your opponent, Christopher Lewis, has gone on record saying, but we had to have that. We had to have that to protect emancipated minors and our students that are over 18. What do you say to that?
I say that's another giant mistruth right there. So those individuals emancipated and over 18 are already legally protected. My own daughter, when she was 18, went in and signed the paperwork at the office. We immediately stopped getting communication about when she was missed class, when her grades were due. She controlled all of that. Once you are 18 and you sign that paperwork with the school, you are legally an adult in their eyes, and the parents are outside of that picture at that point.
Yeah, so regarding Policy 8011, which people have a lot to say about that, what kind of concerns are you hearing as you go door to door?
The concerns that I have is that it's okay for boys to go into the girls' restrooms and locker rooms, and vice versa. Parents are scared for their children. They're scared for the boys going into the girls when we have 20 restrooms within the school system that are unisex bathrooms, which we could call them restrooms, for those children that have special needs. I have a nephew that has Crohn's disease, and he doesn't like to go into the regular bathrooms either because it's embarrassing. But what are we going to do, write a policy for every child with every need that they have? I don't understand why they can't use the restrooms.
And now that has been some of the criticism with 8011. People ask, so does this mean that we write a separate policy for every student? So you see this as an exclusionary policy then?
Absolutely. It's written for one type of child, not for all children.
So I've heard concerns as far as what's going to happen to these students if there isn't a policy in place to protect them. If the policy is in place, what happens to parents' rights and how is that going to be handled? So those are very good questions and very good concerns. And the most important thing that we need to address right away is the and/or statement, because having the parents' rights being optional is not acceptable. So we need to take care of that right away. A lot of parents are very concerned that an administrator could come in and decide that a parent does not need to be part of the process, and that's just not acceptable.
What about the situation where there's an abusive parent?
That analogy comes up over and over again. We've heard it countless times through this, that there are situations where a child may be in danger at home if the school notifies their parents that they are transgender. There are already policies and procedures legally in place for us to follow in this situation where we engage Child Protective Services, we engage the local police department. Our goal is to ensure the safety of every student at our school. So the analogy I keep trying to throw back is, if a child comes to me and says their grades are bad and their dad will beat them up because they got bad grades, don't send the grades home, we are still accountable to the parents. We still send those grades home, and if they do feel in danger, we follow that same policy. We engage the legal team, we engage CPS and the local authorities. We will never treat an endangered situation lightly. This has to be key in all of our students, not just for one subset of our students.
So as an educator, there's a policy and a process for handling those types of things. It's called CPS. And so as a teacher, you're a mandatory reporter. And if you feel that a child's life is in danger, you absolutely have to report that.
What is your intention if elected when it comes to Policy 8011 or 9260?
My intention is to bring it back up to our current board, whoever that new board happens to be, to see if we can bring this policy back up, discuss the divide in our community. What can we do to work together to figure out a solution to this policy? Whether that's a language change, whether that's the policy gets completely changed all and becomes something new, I would like to bring it up, have discussions, bring the community in, some of the key partners that have been on both sides of this battle, and find out, where do we find compromise? Where do we build that unity so that we can have a common solution that everybody will be satisfied with?
Well, as I understand it, as a single board member, you can't just unanimously say, I'm going to bring up this policy. So this has to be brought up to the board, and as a board decided what we're going to do with it next.
And so 8011 really is a policy that needs to be looked at by the entire board. And as a board member, I am going to make sure that I bring the entire community to the table, and I work with my fellow board members to decide what's best for the community.
Now, what about Hazlitt, Okemos, East Lansing, Lansing? What kind of, do they have this policy? Was this?
They do not have this policy, and this is one of the things I would like us to move towards as a compromise, is every situation is dealt with on a one-by-one basis. So if there is, and I would actually like to see a whole new policy written that says any child at our school system that needs special accommodations for whatever reason will be worked with individually to reach those accommodations, so that that student feels safe, that they can thrive in our atmosphere, so that they can build a successful future coming out of Williamston.
Safety and security are big issues nationwide. Could you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, safety today is very different than it used to be. You used to be able to send your children to school and not worry about them. Now it's a time where you have to worry about your children and make sure that you're sending them to a school system that's safe for them. In companies that I've worked at, whether it was safety of the machines or safety of the atmosphere, the environment, I brought in safety companies that would make sure that our employees were working safely, that when they entered the building, it was safe and secure for them too. Some buildings I had badges where people could come in and out. And I'm not saying that we need to do that in a school system, but we need to look at all realms of what we could do to help our children be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a top concern of mine. Every single child matters. So we need to make sure that we are looking at ways that we can enhance security in the schools. I've heard rumblings that that is not a top priority right now, and it needs to be, especially in this day and age. We also need to protect our data. So one of the folks that's running for the Board of Education has a background in data security, which I'm very excited about because he'll bring a new perspective to the table for that. We also need to make sure that we address the bullying issue. Every time I go out knocking on doors, that's the number one topic that people are talking about is bullying. Not any specific type of bullying, just across the board bullying, and that's a culture problem and that's a leadership problem, and we need to address that immediately because that starts at the top.
Now, security is really a hot topic. Can you share a little bit about your background with that in communications and security?
Yeah, so most of my security deals with data centers and data center security with cameras and technology behind that to make sure that you have instant response to the technology that you're using. For example, let's say you had an incident and all of a sudden you want to use the footage, grab the footage or look at live feeds of what's going on. A lot of times it's not possible. Believe it or not, I mean, it looks like that on TV, but it's not. So it all hits a DVR, and then it goes through a process, and it gets stored, and then it's played back. Well, that has a latency, and sometimes it could be up to 5 minutes or more. And during those events, and it's being able to tell you, during that amount of period of time, you can have an event that could be very dangerous for the students. So I understand the technology and how it has to play in with the system. So when it ties into the police department and so forth, so they can see it remotely and locally.
Craig, what are you going to bring to the board that will help to diversify it and strengthen operations?
Sure. I have over 20 years of experience in the professional world, so I manage global teams, global project program management. I have built giant corporation segments at a Fortune 10 company. Currently, I manage over 3,000 people spread around the globe. I do contract management, sourcing management. I negotiate deals with all kinds of different vendors. I truly think our board right now is very heavy on an educational background. And we need some diversity in the background on the school board. It's great we have some. We don't need all to be educational background. We have to have this business background. We need to look at that, especially from a fiscal perspective, and how do we set these children up for the future. And to tag on to that, I just want to remind everybody that the Michigan Association of School Boards recommends this diverse background for their school board candidates. You need that diversity. You need those alternating perspectives to truly build a consensus and a unified solution.
What would you say, because I've noticed on your resume that you've got this unique background in both the education and the business.
Sure.
What other things do you bring that would help to diversify this board from an operations standpoint?
Absolutely. So I have a sales and marketing background, which I think is going to be very beneficial to the district because we, as a district, we need to remain competitive. Attracting students from other districts into our community is going to be beneficial. And I will be able to help with some of that and bring ideas to the table so that administrators and the superintendent have fresh, ideas that they can bring to the table as well.
Mm-hmm. What do you bring with your professional skill set that would add to that?
Mine is all technology, security, computers, networking, things we actually just passed millage on to expand the millage to cover, security. I think is I add strictly, specifically right to that.
Walter, you've got this strong technology background that could really add to the STEAM initiatives. How would you plan to strengthen what's already happening at Williamston Schools with the STEAM program?
Well, I know where careers should go if you want to enter that kind of field. How you should make sure that you keep your options open before you take a path later in your actual career, not just when you're studying and trying to learn this technology, but how to keep your options open when you're leading through your career. Because by the time you hit 30, your thoughts will change about that, and it's important to keep broad within the technology field, not specific.
So we've heard this before, that as a board member there may be some hot button issues that that people might approach you about in the community. How would you handle that?
Well, the first thing is you have to listen. So you absolutely must listen to people. I've spent the last 22 years working in the business industry, and one thing that is absolutely important is that you have to listen. Customers, need to be felt, they need to be heard, and taxpayers are the customers of the school board. Okay, we work for them. So the first thing is I'm going to listen to everyone's concerns. I'm going to let everyone have a voice, and while doing that, I'm going to take into consideration each and every person's viewpoint, reconsider and test my own viewpoints to make sure that I'm making good decisions for the whole community, not just what I think is best, because that is not how you lead.
Well, for one thing, I think that the board needs to be a very diverse group of people. we need to have educators and we need to have people from real business backgrounds. But having people like Karen, who has the background in education, Walter, the background in IT and being able to bring systems to the structure of Williamston Schools, and also Craig in his big business world, and my HR skills, I think that we would make a great team.